what is the Federal Reserve System? The answer is a surprise to many people, as it was to me. It is not a government agency. What? The Federal Reserve System that produces our money, the nation's money, isn't an agency of the government? The answer is no, dummy. Go look at the charter. Read about it. Learn about it. The Federal Reserve System is our hidden government, and we don't know it for the most part. Our government does not run the banks. The banks run the government. And a lot of their research, however, was spent avoiding finding a cure. I don't think I've ever said that before. That's a pretty controversial statement, but that's the truth. So the consumer thinks he has a choice, because look at all those names up there on the billboards. They're all different. They don't realize that most of the candy bars are all made by the same company. That famous line coming from John D. Rockefeller says, competition is a sin. So this all goes back to that time when cartelization had already spread around the world in many industries, but it's not time to give up yet. We don't have to put our hands out and say, put this bracelets on there and tie our feet to a chain. No, we have to fight this thing.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to our show. It's my honor to present our today's guest, G. Edward Griffin, American author, researcher, documentary film producer, founder of Red Pill Expo and Freedom Force International. Welcome, Mr. Griffin. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, Vera, thank you for inviting me. My pleasure.
So usually during my interviews, I jump right into questions, but today is a little bit different. I'd like to start with my personal story. I actually read your books, and this is my favorite one, World Without Cancer. And it happened to help one of my closest family members, because when she was diagnosed with cancer a few years back, she actually applied some of the things that you talk about in the book and in this research. And a couple of months after the diagnosis, when she came back to the doctor's office for a follow-up, the cancer was no longer there. So this is my own personal story, the story from my family. And my first question is specifically about this book. So how did the idea of writing it came to you? And what was the most challenging part of this work?
Okay, well, I came to write about it not because I have any particular background in health science or cancer or anything like that. Is because I had a very close friend who was a very successful practicing medical doctor in the San Francisco area, and we had a lot in common, but we never talked much about medicine, which was, of course, his profession. We had a common interest in what was going on in the world, politically and socially, and what was happening to the money supply and all those more serious things. Of course, health is very serious too, but most of us, at least it was true of me at that time, we felt we had no control over our own health. If we were healthy, that was good, and if we got sick, well, we were one of the unlucky ones. So then we had no responsibility for that, of course, so we had to go to the doctor and ask the doctor to fix us up. But so that was my attitude at the time. So we never talked much about his profession. But one day we got together and he asked me, he said, Ed, I have a favor to ask of you. Of course, I said, sure, what is it? This is Dr. John Richardson, by the way, who he was an ear, eye, nose, and throat specialist in the San Francisco area, had a very large practice there. And he said, I am getting in trouble with the medical profession, the California Medical Society Association, and indirectly the American Medical Association. And I said, well, you were getting in trouble with them? Why? He said, it's because I'm curing cancer. I did not understand the irony of that statement at the time. I said, what do you mean, you're curing cancer and that's getting you in trouble? And he said, yes, that is the problem. And so I said, well, you have to explain that to me. And he did. He said, well, here it is. He said, I've been treating cancer patients with a substance that's found in nature. He said, that's not what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm a medical doctor. I went to school and learned about medicines that are made in test tubes and in factories. And they don't come from nature. They come from chemistry, man-made, patented chemicals and compounds and that sort of thing. He said, so when I started to do this, I was very leery about it because I had no faith in it, because that's contrary to everything that I had been taught in school. He said, but because of my office manager, who was quite a brilliant fellow on his own, he wasn't a doctor, but he knew a lot about medicine and health. And he said, because of my office manager, I was introduced to a substance that he had heard about that had been acclaimed to be very successful in curing these so-called uncurable cancers. He said, well, I wasn't very anxious to step outside of my role. I didn't want to mess around with it. But he was quite incessant, and he insisted, and he said, I decided to try it on my dog. He said, my dog had cancer. We tried all the therapies that I knew about, that I'd learned in medical school. The dog, poor dog, was getting sicker and sicker, and nothing was happening, and we were going to have to put him down. So he thought, well, what if I got to lose? The poor animal was going anyway. So he started to use this substance, and lo and behold, the dog got well very quickly and was out there prancing around and chasing sticks and balls that were being thrown at him, and he wanted to play. He had returned to health. I said, well, this is amazing. So at that point, Dr. John explained to me they took a real serious interest in studying this substance found in nature, and he found out that there was quite a bit of good science behind why it should possibly work. It wasn't just something that had been handed down by somebody's grandfather or grandmother. This was the substance in question, which I'll get to in a moment, had been tested extensively in laboratories around the world and had been known in Europe for almost 100 years, but never had it ever been accepted by the, let's call it the pharmaceutical industry or the fraternity, because you can't patent something that's found in nature. And so the chemical companies, they call themselves drug companies, or they like to put the word ethical in front of that, the ethical drug companies, turns out to be not so ethical after all, because they're not interested in a substance that cures a disease. What they're interested in is, because if they produced substances that cured diseases like we all think, then they would be getting rid of their customers. Their customers would get well, and then they would no longer have a paying customer. So it had been realized indirectly and gradually over decades that the medical profession really in its own self-interest had to adopt a business model that said curing is not our goal, but treating is our goal. Because there's money in treating a sickness. People are sick, they're worried about dying, they're in pain in many cases, and there's no amount of money they'll hesitate to spend. And as long as you can treat their symptoms, not cure their disease, but treat their symptoms so that their pain is diminished, or their headaches are going away, or they have a little more stamina, or whatever their problem was, if you can get rid of or reduce the symptoms, but not get rid of the disease or the condition, so the patient remains sick, but they're able to go to work because you reduce their symptoms, but they continue to get sicker and sicker and sicker. And so that at some point you realize that, well, the treating of the symptoms, this is all, by the way, I must explain, this is all what Dr. John was teaching me at this point. I had heard nothing about this at the time. But by treating the symptoms and not eliminating or discovering the cause of the disease, it was quite common that the chemicals that they devised to reduce pain and other symptoms had their own side effects that were not healthy. And so the new medication for treating the symptoms of a disease was actually making the patient gradually sicker than they were to begin, because now they have another condition, which is toxicity from the drugs that were being treated to get rid of or control the symptoms. And so at that point, the patient comes to the doctor and says, well, I've got more symptoms, but they're different. And so then there's another medication that is produced and delivered to the patient to treat those symptoms. And of course, that costs a lot of money too. And so this is the business model that Dr. John was explaining to me that had been imposed upon his profession. And when he went into medicine, it was not that way, he said, or if it was, he didn't realize it. But he had seen it evolve, and he was in the middle of seeing it again, because here he was treating patients for cancer with a substance found in nature that was so cheap that it was like eating a bag of peanuts or something like that. That's how expensive it was. You can go out and buy this stuff in the open market, and it's just a food. And so the pharmaceutical industry, which dominates the medical profession, is no longer interested in that at all. Even if it does cure the cancer, that's the last thing they want to see. Now, they say they want to cure the cancer, and when they, cut it out or burn it out or whatever, they think they're getting rid of it. They're not getting rid of the cause of the cancer. They're getting rid of the symptom of the cancer, the lump or the bump. That's the symptom. That's not the cancer. That's the growth. That's the result of the underlying condition. Anyway, I'm listening with my eyes wide open to all this. And he said, so now I'm in trouble with the medical profession because they're going to take away my license if I keep using this stuff. And what I'd like you to do, he said, I'm a doctor. I treat patients. You're a writer. You write articles on things that are hard to understand. Would you be willing to work with me to help me write an article that we could publish in a newspaper or a magazine explaining what I'm doing and the amazing good results I'm getting and why we think we're getting them, and how we can perhaps save millions and millions of lives and reduce suffering for millions more? I said, well, sure, I'd be glad to do that, John. So I committed on that conversation. I was intrigued by what he had told me. I didn't understand most of it. Frankly, I had no idea of how much voltage was in that wire that I was about to grab hold of and try and write an article. I thought, well, I can do this in a couple of days or maybe at the most a week and help my friend. Well, the deeper I got into it, I realized this was something huge and something that shocked me to the core because, like most people, I had always been brought up to think that the doctor, our good family doctor, was a good man, and he had nothing but interest in curing his patients in mind. And I knew some of these people, and that's who they were. They were that kind of person. But Dr. John was explaining to me that now that the medical profession had been dominated by the pharmaceutical industry through all of its huge monetary grants to, build these universities and these laboratories and these hospitals on condition that they only use pharmaceuticals and nothing from nature. But so the whole industry had gradually been weaned away by the lure of money to the point where they got rid of anything from nature that had already been proven in many cases to be highly effective. And those were now condemned as being quackery because the same pharmaceutical companies had been paying a lot of money to congressmen and senators, and they were buying political leverage and were actually getting laws passed that declared as legal truth and doctrine that anybody that used something other than these chemicals that came from the orthodox pharmaceutical companies, that was all quackery and that was evil. And so it became illegal even in many cases to even talk to a patient about using something that grows on a tree or a bush or a root or something like that. And I thought, well, this is interesting. I'll delve into it. But then, now I'm getting to your point. You probably didn't expect this long answer to a simple question. But I finally got to the point where I understood what Dr. John was explaining to me. And it shocked me. I was really very sad, to tell you the truth, and I'm angry. I'm still sad and angry, but the first time out, it was really a blow to me to realize that the profession which I had admired and respected so deeply had been corrupted by the economic value of treating patients and keeping them sick. So that's how I got into this, and I had no intention of writing a book. I mean, I'm the last person in the world who would be qualified to write a reasonably accurate, scientifically accurate treatise, also to make it understandable to the average person, but to make it correctly stated and understood. You have to understand the chemistry underneath it and all that. I'm the last person in the world for that. But fortunately, I had a lot of good tutors. Dr. John was a very good teacher, and then I got to meet the one doctor who advanced this whole idea that I'm talking about in the first place. His name was Dr. Ernst T. Krebs Jr., and he was in San Francisco also. And I spent many an afternoon in his office. He had a very nice office in the basement of his nice home over in San Francisco, one of the old-time Victorian homes. It was a beautiful place and comfortable. But he would sit down there and he would talk to me and he'd pound these ideas into my head. And all I could do was just whiz and say, well, wait a minute, Dr. Krebs, can you back over that again? What did you say? What was this thing called? Diploid totipotent cell or something? What the heck is that? And he'd pull a book out of his shelf and say, here, take this home and read it and you'll understand. So that's how I got into it. Vera, it was not intentional. And as I said, I'm the last person to write a book on that, but I did have teachers who were very patient with me, and I read some of their textbooks that they studied, and I got to understand what these long medical terms actually meant. They're usually not as complicated as they sound. Sometimes they're very simple, but I discovered that they actually make them deliberately complicated and use a lot of Latin, because that way you can charge more money for the medications, and if they're in Latin. So anyway, that's how I got into it, and I'm glad I did, because I didn't write the book really expecting that it would become a bestseller or anything like that. But I was surprised when right away people started to respond and say, oh, thank you for this. My daughter, who they said we had to remove her right arm, or my son, who had to have his leg removed or something because of cancer, and it was spreading wildly. They're both perfectly well now, and because they did what you said to do in your book, I had no idea that would ever happen. But once it started to happen, it was a real charge, and it made me so grateful that I took the time to do it and to inform myself. And the biggest payoff of all is when I became sick myself, not of cancer, fortunately, because by this time I knew what to take, a substance that I'll identify in just a moment, in nature. And so I wasn't worried about cancer. I'm still not here. I'm 93 years old right now, and I don't think I'm going to get cancer unless I decide to live under a radiation X-ray machine or something like that. But it did save my life, because I had learned about the business model of modern medicine. So I was leery of it. And I still respect doctors. A lot of them still have that old-fashioned instinct, and they treat patients for free if they can't afford it. But the number of those guys is very, very small compared to what it used to be. Unfortunately, today you can't compare with what it was 50 or 60 years ago or 80 years ago. The motivation for all of this has become strictly economic rather than humanitarian. So that's the long-winded answer to your question. That's how I got into it, and I thank God I did. That information has saved a lot of lives, and probably has saved mine as well.
Thank you so much for doing such a fantastic job with putting together a very complex subject in the terms that average people can understand. And I can also share my experience. One of the things that especially impressed me in your book is the fact that almost every single page had several footnotes to it, where you describe the research and the studies that you used to come into this or that conclusion. And this is something that, frankly, rarely seen, if seen at all. So this is what I like as well.
Well,
And
thank you for that. It was not only wise, I knew it was necessary because I knew I would be going upstream against popular opinion. And I knew people would say, well, what does this guy know about cancer or medicine? Did he go to medical school? Well, he's just a quack of, like what we heard about. So I knew I had to document everything very clearly. And I had to use references that were not friendly to the main thesis of the business model, for example. I had to use sources of the people themselves who were admitting all of the negatives that I'm talking about. They would admit it among themselves and talk about it among themselves and sometimes even laugh about it. But they would never acknowledge it in public. So I had to find those sources where these people were talking about issues that otherwise they would probably deny in public. So when you're doing that, you better have your documentation all lined up in a row, or else you're not going to succeed.
as you famously said, there is the science of cancer, which is relatively simple, and then there is the politics of cancer, which is more complex. So if we could understand the logic of pharmaceutical companies, even though it's not moral, but there is some logic there. If they let cancer be cured, then the revenue would basically stop, right? Then, if we turn to our public health institutions and examine the way they've been treating alternative natural cures, it doesn't make much sense. So, why do you think is that? Why there is such a huge pressure on the doctors, the researchers, who frankly get not only ridiculed or censored for sharing something like that, which is quite simple, inexpensive, natural. A lot of times they even get persecuted for it. So why is it happening?
Well, the why is quite simple. It's what I was alluding to earlier. It's the money. You know the old saying, follow the money. And that's certainly true in this case. Now, there are certain people, actors on the stage, that make a lot more money on this scam. Let's call it that. I think it's a pretty good name for it. Make a lot more money than others. The simple researcher in the laboratory, he makes a good income because he's a specialist, has a learning capacity for dealing with drugs and drug reactions, and can map out drug pathways and all these things that normal humans like the rest of us could never do. And they get paid very well. But the companies themselves, the big companies, the ones that are interested in mass vaccinating or medicating every single human being on the planet, they're not satisfied until you and I and everyone is hooked on some kind of drugs. Today, I have a little story that amplifies that. You know, at my age, I sometimes go and take these free, or not free, but low cost medical examinations where you can get your blood test and your echogram and all these things and your heartbeat. And, you know, for 50 or 80 or $100, you can get this very elaborate report. And then it'll probably find some symptom that you don't want to see. And then if you find the symptom, you go to the doctor and he gives you the pharmaceutical drugs, and now you're really sick. Excuse my adding that last part on there. But I go to those screenings, I think they call them, quite often. And the typical situation is that when they're asking, well, what is your name and what's your occupation and so forth, and then the question inevitably comes, well, what meds are you on? What meds are you taking? And I have to say, well, if you mean medications, yes, medications. And well, I don't take any. And usually it's a nice little nurse or an assistant at the table said, no, Mr. Griffin, I mean, what medications did the doctor prescribe? What are you taking regularly? And I have to say, well, none. And then she puts the paper in. I mean, sometimes they argue with me. They think I'm lying. How is it a person of your age doesn't have a whole medicine cabinet full of meds, as they like to call them, prescribed by your doctor? And so I don't try and educate the poor girl at that time. I just say, well, I guess I'm lucky, which I am, and let it go at that. And she shakes her head and says, okay, no meds. Well, then, okay, why do I say that? Is because there's big money in selling drugs. And these drugs, no matter how miracle they claim to be, are not that expensive to make. Now, maybe there's a lot of research that goes into it to get the results they're looking for. But believe me, they're not looking for results that cure. They're looking for results that reduce symptoms and keep the patient alive so he can continue to take the meds. I'm back to that again. So you have to work around that a little bit to say, well, why do they do this? Well, it's the money. It's pure and simple. And some of them make a lot of money and some of them make just a good living. But the ones who make the real killing, of course, are the investors and the managers, primarily the executive managers of these large pharmaceutical companies, these international organizations that get governments to pay for their research, that get you and I as the taxpayers to fund their research and let them have the patents on the products that they come up with. And then these same companies produce other medications that are designed to combat the symptoms of the first medications. And then other elements of the corporations design the X-ray machines and the therapeutic machines and the various devices that are very expensive to treat this, that, and the other thing. It's all about treat, treat, treat. Exam, 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 test, test. It's a money machine. And that's the simple answer to it. Now, most of the people involved in this machine, the little cogs and the wheels and the pulleys, have no idea of that. I can assure you of that because a lot of these people are my friends. My wife is a registered nurse. She had trouble with this at first too. She spent a lot of time and at the university becoming a registered nurse, and she got some extra degrees on top of that. She knows about medicine. She knows about human sickness, illness, and it was hard for her to come to a realization of what I've just been saying, that it was true. But when she finally said, I guess I have to admit it, she said, it is true. And it's hard for people who are on the line and really care about patients. But when you get to the corporate level and you say, well, if we put this drug on the market and lie about its true after effect, and we can do that, we just bury the information in our reports, and eventually they'll probably catch us, but they'll fine us, $8 million. But that's okay. We'll make $128 million on it by that time. We can afford that. So at the board level, they are not humanitarians. They couldn't care less about your health or mine. And that's what we're dealing with, is the separation of the human race, you might say, between those who really care and who are being fooled and being injured, and those at the top who, for the most part, don't care and really, I think, probably have no compassion whatsoever for the damage they do, with the knowledge that, well, the people are too damn dumb anyway. They're going to poison themselves on something. They might as well poison it on our stuff because we can make money on it.
And I think there is also this big misconception among the public in general in terms of public health institutions. If we take Food and Drug Administration and something is FDA approved, a lot of people think that FDA did some type of study to prove that this is safe, right? When in reality, FDA actually relies on studies that are supplied to them by the manufacturers of the drugs. And a lot of times, pharmaceutical executives actually come to the FDA after they finish their career at the private industry and vice versa. So it's kind of a big elephant in the room that not a lot of people talk about. My next question, do you still keep following this topic? And if yes, do you happen to come across any other natural treatments that get suppressed right now at this moment?
Oh, yes. It was not just. Oh, by the way, in the beginning I said I'll mention and describe what this substance was, which I never got to do, and I probably should do that now because, yes, what I'm going to describe is called amygdalin. That's its official chemical name, and it's just one of many, many substances found in nature. I didn't know that at first. I thought amygdalin was probably one of a kind, and thank goodness we had it, But then as I got deeper into the research and over the years, I learned that there are so many things found in nature that, in my view at least, they're so unique and so useless for anything else, that they must have been put there by design, by some grand designer, whatever you want to call him or she or it. Somebody or something figured it out that these substances in nature that you find in plants, for the most part, are exactly what is needed for the human body and other animals to remain in balance with all the attacks against it. And so, yeah, and every one of those that they're found in nature, every one of them you will find are rejected by the modern medical establishment because you can find the cures in nature. And if that word ever gets out, there's a multi-trillion-dollar business that goes kapunk. And so that's really what we're up against. And it's been that way for a long time. I remember back in the old days when I was just a boy, it was common to hear about doctors who would take patients in and treat them just like everybody else, even though they were paupers. Now, sometimes they would say, well, you can't afford my treatment. Maybe you could bring me one of Madeline's good apple pies or something like that. And a lot of patients who were poor actually got free treatment or used barter to pay for it. And the doctors were fine with that. I remember reading some statistics. I don't know how accurate they were, but it went, I think the effect, they said, back in that day, before the turn of the last century, it was common for doctors to have about 30% of their practice as free, people that couldn't afford to pay. 30% of their practice. And that was just common. You would expect it. But now, no, we got to have this Medicare system that's all, look at the board of directors on all those agencies, and they're all pharmaceutical industries.
Yes.
And the insurance companies, they're run by pharmaceutical industries. So that if you're taking an apricot seed or something like that, which contains the amygdalin I'm talking about, you'll never get that covered in your insurance. But you buy a prescription for something that costs $3,000 a week. Oh, they'll gladly pay for that because that's the money that goes to the insurance company. That costs them about 30 cents or something, maybe 80 cents even, but they can collect huge amounts of money. And they justify it because, well, it's modern medicine, that's expensive, and we had to do a lot of research. And a lot of their research, however, was spent avoiding finding a cure. I don't think I've ever said that before. That's a pretty controversial statement, but that's the truth. I'll give you one quick example, and you've read my book, so you remember this probably. Let's see, how do I shorten this down? There was a congressman, and I can't remember his name, who requested the minutes of the board meeting of Sloan Kettering, the Sloan Kettering Teaching Hospital in New York City, which is one of the big medical establishments completely funded by the pharmaceutical industry indirectly. Had a couple of Rockefeller men on the board of directors, and John D. Rockefeller, I think, funded the building that they all worked out of and so forth, which is a common arrangement, by the way. When you start looking at the board of directors of these hospitals, the teaching hospitals and so forth, it's always loaded with bankers and people that have heavy investments in pharmaceutical companies. So that's an aside. So anyway, this congressman asked, I think it was a Freedom of Information Act request, to see the minutes of the board on a certain date. And he had been told that it was on that date that the board considered doing research on amygdalin, which is the substance I'm talking about. And he found the board minutes, and he published them. And I have that in the book. And I think the wording is pretty close in my memory. It went like this: Sloan Kettering is not interested in researching the chemical pathways of amygdalin, but we would be highly interested in researching the discovery of subcomponents of amygdalin that we could patent and then put into commerce. And I probably used a few words that were incorrect, but that was the clear meaning. They were saying, look, if we can patent it, we're interested in researching it. If we can't patent it, don't talk to us about how good it is and how many lives it saves. We are not interested. And that's what we're up against. They spend a lot of their time avoiding a cure for something. It's not just researching for a cure. They avoid as hard as they can a cure if it comes from nature because they can't patent it.
LiveFEED is an independent media platform. Our only mission is to bring truthful and independent reporting. If you'd like to support our work, join our channel as a member and be the first to watch all new videos as soon as they come out. Thank you for supporting independent journalism. People like you make it all possible.
My next question is about your yet another best-selling book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, a second look at the Federal Reserve. Creation of the Federal Reserve is a very complex subject. And for those of our viewers who are not that familiar with you or your work, can you briefly explain why did you get interested in the subject in the first place? And what is the Federal Reserve and what is the money?
Okay, well, that's another one of those deep topics and take too long. But we don't have to go all the way to the bottom. What we're dealing here with when we look at the Federal Reserve System is merely a mirror image of what we've been talking about in the healthcare system. It has to do with cartels. Now, that's a strange word to some people, so let me define what I mean when I use the word cartel. It's a monopoly, but it's not a monopoly of just one company. It's a monopoly made up of a combination of companies all in the same industry who decide that they're through competing with each other as totally as they had, and they're going to join forces, and through an association, which they sometimes like to call it, like the Milk Association or the Automobile Makers Association or something like that. They join together and they come to cartel agreements among themselves in which they agree to limit or eliminate competition between themselves. Now that would be, for example, if there would be price competition. They would agree among themselves that they would vary their prices on a very small margin, so that if you went to one bank or another bank, the interest you're going to get on your deposit is pretty close to the same as any other bank that you go to. That would be a result of a price fixing agreement between all the members of the banks. And the cartels come to agreements such as, well, all right, we're making automobiles, and we can make them anywhere in the world, but let's agree, you make them in Europe, somebody else will make them in Asia, we'll make them in North America, and so forth. And if we're going to make them outside of the country, we'll be partners with our competitors and so forth. So in all of these measures that they do, they come to reduce the options to the consumer. So the consumer thinks he has a choice, because look at all those names up there on the billboards. They're all different. They don't realize that most of the candy bars are all made by the same company, even though it says Hershey or Reese's or something else. They're all, look at the corporate structure. They're all one company, but they use different, or they might be subdivisions or subordinate, to a master company. A subsidiary is what I'm trying to think of the word. And so this is a process that's been going on for a long time in the world. But back in 1910, when the Federal Reserve System was coming into existence, was being planned at least, that was a move to put the banking industry into a cartel arrangement. Prior to that time, the investment banks were serious competitors. They were fighting with each other for dominance all around the world. Blood in the streets, so to speak, in the buying and selling of market shares and financing of new corporations and the big deals. I mean, that was in Paris and in London and in New York. And the guys got together and said, look, why are we competing with each other when we could all work together and each share a major part of the market? And And that way we can control our competition and we can make more profits, and that'll be just fine, won't it? And so you had that famous line coming from John D. Rockefeller. It says, competition is a sin. That was his slogan in a way. And of course, he used competition to climb to the top, but once he was there, he didn't want anybody else to compete and possibly knock him off the top of the hill. So this all goes back to that time when cartelization had already spread around the world in many industries, but the banking industry was one of the last ones to go. And so what is the Federal Reserve System? The answer is a surprise to many people, as it was to me, is that it is, first, what it is not. It is not a government agency. What? The Federal Reserve System that produces our money, the nation's money, isn't an agency of the government? The answer is no, dummy. Go look at the charter, read about it, learn about it. So that was the first thing I was shocked to find out, is that the Federal Reserve System is a private cartel of banks. And these banks had such tremendous economic power, we're back to follow the money again, had such economic power and had ownership in media outlets so they could determine who gets good publicity and who gets bad publicity, which is a very valuable thing if you're running for Congress or Senate or president. You want to have these media companies in your hip pocket. So these banks became very powerful in politics because of their financial ability to buy politicians and influence politicians and others as well. And they put their money into media outlets and into school systems and in tax-exempt foundations, any way that they could influence public opinion and public policy. And indirectly, they came to control the government. We like to think in terms of the government controlling the Federal Reserve System. Every once in a while, you see these hearings and you see the congressmen or the senators sitting there in the dais up on the upper level, and they're looking very stern, and they're asking these hard questions of the chairman of the Federal Reserve System, who sits down below at a table and sort of looks nervous and so forth. And it sounds, by the tone of the voice and the questions that are being asked, that those guys up on the dais are really controlling the Federal Reserve System. That's why they're asking these hard questions, as though they're going to do something with the answers. Well, it's just the other way around, folks. I discovered these guys down below represent the mainspring of power, which is money. They make the money. And that's the other part of this answer. What they do is make money. They create it, and they determine the rules by which it is created. They determine who gets it and who doesn't, indirectly by determining interest rates and that kind of thing. Who gets good interest rates, who gets low interest rates. And they have inside information, and they buy politicians, and they put all this together, and these are the people who sit there quietly behind the scenes and run our government. Our government does not run the banks. The banks run the government. So in a nutshell, that's my, believe it or not, that's my short answer to your question. What is so shocking? This is what I learned, and this is the most shocking thing, is that our country no longer is in the hands of the American people. They think it is. They talk as though they go to the polls and the people vote for it, right? Well, forget the issue of rigged elections. The people vote for the candidate that they hear about in their press favorably, and they vote against the candidates that they hear about in their press unfavorably, because their opinions about their candidates are determined solely by their information that comes to them through the media. Well, the banks not only own the candidates, they own the media. So the average voter is almost hopeless, or helpless, I should say, because he trusts his media. And he thinks that those guys running for office are trustworthy. He thinks they're telling the truth. It reminds me of what is that cartoon character comes out at Christmas time, and the little boy always kicks the football, and the little girl pulls it out just every time. She fools him every Christmas. He said, "Can I really trust you this time?" And she said, "Yeah, I won't pull the football out this time. I promise. Oh, and he runs and kicks the ball. And of course, she pulls it out. Americans go to the poll every single time, and they know the candidates almost always do the opposite of what they say they're going to do. They promise there'll be no war, get our boys home, but the minute they're elected, oh, well, we got to send our boys overseas, fight for democracy around the world. And they speak against the Federal Reserve System. Oh, we got to do something about the inflation. We got to do something about, but once they're in office, they don't do anything about it. They just talk about it. And how far do I have to go? What is the Federal Reserve System? I'm interested in the topic because I discovered this horrible truth that I'm trying to describe now so inadequately, that the Federal Reserve System is our hidden government, and we don't know it for the most part.
So Federal Reserve is not actually federal, and it's not a reserve, right?
That's correct. That's correct.
What is money?
Well, that's an interesting topic. It can be complex or simple, depending on whether you're a citizen trying to understand it, in which case you want it simple. But if you're a college professor teaching it, you want it complex. So it depends on who you go for the answer. I had to read all of the books by the college professors when I was writing my book to see how they defined money. And I was amazed to find out that almost every one of them had a slightly different definition. And they argued among themselves as to which was the correct definition. And then I went to the encyclopedia and went to the dictionaries, and I found the answer there. And it's pretty simple. Money, and for the moment, will not try and make a distinction between good money and bad money, which is money. Money is generally defined in all the dictionaries as a medium of exchange. And the word medium is important because people exchange money not because they want the money, it's because they think that if they have the money, then they can get what they want with that money. So it's a medium of exchange. If it was a direct exchange, this for that, it would be called barter. But if you don't want that, or if you do want that, and the person offering it for sale doesn't want what you have, then you can't make a trade if you're stuck with barter. But if you have something that both parties feel is of value and that they can exchange for something to another person, they'll gladly take it as a temporary medium of exchange in anticipation of being able to trade it as barter for something else. So it's a simple definition. It's a medium of exchange. Now, it turns out that there are good medium, or media, I should say, good media and poor media that you're going to exchange. And that's where it gets into the interesting part. Well, what's good and what's bad? The good part, I have to make this simple because this is not a place to go into the whole book, but good money is that money which has intrinsic value for something other than money. Something that everybody either wants or knows that there's a strong market for it and they can swap it out for something they want on its own without being money. Now, what would that be? Well, in the beginning of money, the history of money, you have to start off with the Egyptians and the ancient Egyptians. And the first money was jars of wheat. Jars of wheat. Everybody could use wheat as your food, and it could be stored in these jars for fairly long periods of time. So it had one of the qualities of good money, and that is that it had value, intrinsic value, for something other than money. But if you happen to be an affluent person, a wealthy person, even in those days, you would be a person that had a lot of jars of wheat in your warehouse, and more than you could ever eat. But you had those jars of wheat, not because you were going to eat them, but you knew that you could swap a jar of wheat to somebody else for something that they had, maybe a couple of blankets or something that you wanted. And so wheat became the first widely recognized form of money. And it evolved over the years. Cows and sheep and livestock that could be converted into money became used as money. Cows especially. In fact, I understand the word fiduciary, or fiduciary, responsibility, fiduciary, comes from the Latin word fiducia, for cows. And that was in ancient Rome, cows were money. If you had a couple of cows, you could swap a cow for a great deal of other things that you want. So good money is something that has value other than being a medium of exchange. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a medium of exchange. That's the point. So I just stop there. There's a whole string of things that make some forms of money better than others, but let's just stop there for the moment. That's an important one. If you have something like gold or silver, a 1 ounce gold coin, let's say, and you had confidence that that was true silver, especially if you had some way to measure it, if you had a testing device, and you could say, oh, yep, that's right, that's 0.999% pure silver, and you could weigh it, and yep, that's 1 ounce. Now you've got something that is really good money. And because everybody needs silver, or not everybody, but everybody knows of somebody who needs silver. Silver is widely used. Even in old times, it was used in jewelry and knickknacks and fixtures and things. But in modern times, good Lord, silver is used in all electronics and a lot of metallurgical compounds that have qualities other than electronics and so forth. You can always find a use for, or somebody that needs and will buy silver. So that makes it an ideal medium of exchange, in gold somewhat also, without royal decree or anything, but just experience, freedom of choice, using whatever you want to use as a medium of exchange. Around the world, it always evolved eventually to gold and silver. Nobody ordered it, it's just that happens to be the one that humans always eventually came to have the most confidence in. So money, what is money then? Now, bad money is something where there's nothing behind it, no use for it except to swap. And as long as people are willing to accept it, it works. But if ever they lose confidence in it, there's no way for them to take that IOU or the piece of paper or your checkbook or those numbers that they give you, that you're the proud possessor of $3,522 in your checking account. Yeah, if the bank goes belly up, find somebody that's willing to take your checkbook and give you anything in return for it. See, ink and paper do not have any value at all. So bad money is something that is not useful for anything other than money. And what more can I say? I guess that's the short answer to your question. A medium of exchange, and there's good and bad. And as long as people don't understand these principles, they're going to be hoodwinked into accepting bad money, like the American people have been hoodwinked into accepting US dollars that no longer have any backing of gold or silver. Used to be, if you took one of those dollars, it was like a receipt. Like here's how it worked, to a vault, to a bank, and say, I'm going to deposit my 1 ounce of silver, and they would give you a receipt. Okay, this receipt is good for 1 ounce of silver to the bearer on demand, either your name or the bearer on demand. There are bearer bonds and so forth. And as long as you had that, you could take it to the vault, say, okay, I want my silver back. And you get your silver in return for the money, for the paper. And that's when they said there's money that's as good as gold or good as silver, because you can swap it back into the silver or something else that has intrinsic value. Well, today, our dollar bills are worth nothing on their own. It's only because the government has the police power to force people like us to accept it. If we don't accept it, we go to prison. Otherwise, not many would accept it. They'd try something else for sure.
Another interesting concept that you introduced in your book is that a Federal Reserve actually helps increasing inflation and actually helps to fund war. And if we look at the history, Federal Reserve was created in 1913, and actually World War I started shortly after. Then the Great Depression followed, and then World War II started. So the history just shows us this example. But speaking about today, we see that the number of countries actually refuse to deal with the US dollar anymore. And these happen to be countries that are not friendly with the United States, such as Russia, China, Iran, the rise of the BRICS nations. So what's your opinion? What can we expect within the next, let's say, 2 to 5 years from now in terms of our own well-being with where the US dollar is heading?
I almost wish you hadn't asked me that question because I have to answer honestly, and it might be very unpleasant to hear. And many of your listeners might think, "Oh, good grief, this is garbage. It can't happen here," like they used to say. But it is happening here. So let me answer your question as I see it. I'll put that on it as I see it. The money system in the world is in the process of changing. It's changing because of the arrival of something brand new in history. Up until now, you could go from one monetary system to the other, but they'd always be the same, identical. They would be something based on intrinsic value, like I've been talking about, but then the governments would start debauching that intrinsic value. Started off by shaving a little bit of gold off of each coin, and then they started adding other metals to the coin and cheating on the amount of precious metals that were in the coin. And then finally they got rid of the coins completely and started putting paper out and so forth. So, but it was every old system that collapsed because of that kind of action was replaced by a new system exactly the same, because that's what the world did. There's never been any prolonged case in history anyway, where banks ever continued to operate completely honestly and openly and keep their contracts and ask for no favors except what everybody in the rest of the world got. Didn't ask for any tax-supported subsidies or special conditions. They could lie when other companies would have to be folded if they were caught lying in their contracts and so forth. So up until now, we've been able to replace one bad currency system with a good one that gradually deteriorated back into a bad one again. That was been the cycle. On sort of the old axiom of if evil can be achieved through a process, it will be. Well, if something has been developed can be used for good or evil, guess which one is going to end up being used for? For both of them, of course. But the most technological advances we've ever seen in history have always been used for evil more than for good. And need I just mention the weapons of war as an example. And now we come to this point in history where money, suddenly for the first time in the history of mankind, the technology has arrived whereby a new monetary system can be created completely different from the old. And this one, as far as I can see, doesn't even have the capacity for good. It's all for evil. But it can be described as being good by saying it's going to replace the old system, which is terrible. So they'll say that, well, the old system that's collapsing around us, especially in the few years ahead when people may be starving and maybe fighting with each other for available food, and our system as we know it is really crumbling around us, then somebody could say, well, this new system is not so hot, but it's better than the old one where everybody's killing each other. And so by comparison, it might be described as good, but there would be nothing good really about it. And what is that system? They're calling it digital. That's not quite accurate in the sense that people think of it. They call it cryptocurrency in a way, meaning everybody knows that means digital. We've got digital money now, let's face it. Our credit cards are digital money. It's just a plastic card. There's nothing of intrinsic value there. And it's not even like a checkbook where you write a piece of paper and you make an agreement. I agree to pay such and such a party. I just wrote their name there, see? And I'm going to pay them this amount of money, see that? That's a contract. It doesn't even have that. It's just a card. You slip it in the slot and, or go to the grocery store. And what we're heading into now is a technocracy, which is so highly advanced with computer excellence that they don't need exchange of money at all anymore. And they're in the process of convincing people that it's a good idea to become a cashless society. They've been working on that for a long, long time, but it's never been possible to make it happen because there's no way that they had a technology where they could make one currency apply to the whole world. And until they could do that, you could always escape one currency and go to the other one. You don't like American dollars? Go buy Japanese yen, or go somewhere else and buy another currency that might be a little bit better. And you could even trade currencies and make money on that process. And besides that, the money was yours. Now we're going into this system where it is a true international monetary currency. There will be only one. They're calling it a central bank digital currency. There'll be different nations that sign up for it, but it'll all be part of one centralized global currency. And there's no other place to go. There will be no other currencies that will be legalized. So you'd have to be deeply into the black market to survive even. And even that, we have the technology now to see who is cheating. They'll know who you talk to, for God's sake. They'll be monitoring you with satellites from the sky. They'll know how close you're standing to somebody who has a police record. They may even be able to hear what you're saying. This is technology that has never existed before in history. And it is not only coming, it is here now. And they're working as fast as they can to close the door on all these other options and make us have to use, without exception, you talk about a cartel or a monopoly, they want to have a monopoly of money, so we have no place else to go except to the central bank digital currency. And that, furthermore, that digital currency will not be ours. We will not own it. We'll be allowed to use it, but it'll belong to the central banks. They've made that very clear. So even though you have, let's say, the equivalent of, let's call them dollars, they'll probably call them something else. Let's just say Ameros or something for American dollars. Anyway, let's just call them Ameros. You may have 1,500 Ameros in your checking account or your credit account, but if you say something even remotely close to what I'm saying here on this program, you suddenly will be punished. Your 1,500 Ameros will be reduced like bingo to maybe 750, and you'll be told why. And now you thought you had $1,500, and your rent's coming due, and that's $800, and you've only got 750. You can't pay your rent, nor to say nothing about buying groceries, or buying gas for your car, or make the payment on your car, or do anything else. You will be sitting out on the street without a house to live in, and without food to drink and to eat. All you can do is sit in the corner with a tin cup begging, but nobody has any coins to put in there either, so they can't even help you if they wanted to. This is the system we're coming to, and it's the first time in history that the technology has made that actually possible. And these guys are drooling over getting it into being as quickly as possible. And I think they are planning to have it all wrapped up by, probably 2030. They keep talking about that. But I think they're shooting for an operational model much before 2030. I think in the next couple of years, we may begin to see this thing unfold, unless, and I want to say this emphatically, unless we stop it. I find it very upsetting that so many of our awake friends are talking only about, oh, how bad it's going to be, and nobody has any vision of what can be done about it, and no ability, no motivation, no drive, no passion to make sure that we stop this from happening. I don't even want to talk about these things unless I can talk about what can be done, and I mean can be done, it's not time to give up yet. We don't have to put our hands out and say, put this bracelets on there and tie our feet to a chain. No, we have to fight this thing. So, but anyway, to answer your question, this is what I see as happening in the very near future. And they've been working on it for a long time. So it's not something that just springs up out of the ground. They've been writing books and giving speeches and holding seminars on this process for years. So we do know exactly what they have in mind.
What's the solution?
Well, the solution is to get rid of these people. When I say get rid of them, I don't mean to cut off their heads or anything, although some people are advocating that. And I can understand why they get so passionate about it. No, I think we need to just get them out of the positions of authority. Most of these people are in positions of authority, and we vote them into office. The main ones, we vote into office. Now we say, what can we do about that? Well, let's stop voting for these people. Now that's more difficult than it sounds, because we don't even know who these people are for the most part, because they lie to us. There's something called the controlled opposition leader. I remember as a student studying communism, I came across the works of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, and in his works, he talks about strategies for coming to power. He says something like this, is a paraphrase. He says, comrades, if we go to a country and we want to take it over from the inside, not invade it from the outside, but from the inside, we have to be accepted by the people of that country as friends, not conquerors. So do we stand up in front of them and say, we are communists, we have come here to take over your country and to get rid of your national identity and your legal system and your language and your religions and your everything else, and become international socialists and give up your property and let us run your home and all these things? No, comrades, we don't do that. They would never support us. Instead, we will tell them that we are anti-communists. We will tell them that we are nationalists and that we love our country and we're concerned about foreign and alien ideas coming into our country. And we want to build a movement against that. Vote for us, and they will. Then when you come to power, comrades, now you can betray them. And if they disagree with you and want to debate with you, argue with you, you can shoot them. Now this is Lenin speaking. He's quite a quotable guy. He's the guy that wrote, "Promises are like pie crusts, made to be broken." We have to understand that when we're in the political arena as we are now, and this is the solution. You said, how are we going to do this? Well, we're not going to do it with guns in the street, because that's not where it's being fought. It's being fought for ideas, the loyalties and the thoughts of men and women. And it's being taught in our classrooms, and it's being advocated over our media centers and all of that. And this is where the battle is going on, and this is where we have to defeat it. We have to become active in the power centers of society, which means the political parties, the labor unions, trade, the Kiwanis Club, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts. Look what's happening to Boy Scouts. I mean, some of these things are crazy, because you look at all of these organizations and power centers of society, and for the past 5 or 6 decades, they've been infiltrated by these controlled opposition people who pretend to be, Americans just like everybody else, but they're collectivists. They want to bring about this system we're talking about. They want it. They think they're going to run it. They think they're going to be the rulers, and they might be for a while. But that's what motivates them. And some of them think it's really a good idea in the first place, but I don't think most of them have that idea. They're just thinking about they're going to be in charge, and they'll have a cushy life while the rest of us will have to serve them and be slaves to them. So that's where the battle is being fought, and we can win it there if we get away from our television sets, for one thing, and get off of our couches, get out into the public where the people really are in these organizations, and become active and recapture control of the systems. This is the way they stole it from us. It can be done, and there are tactics and strategies that we can even borrow some of them from them, which we can't borrow their ethics or their morality. Their ideas about warfare is that there's only one immoral act in warfare, and that's to lose. And you could make an argument for that if you're fighting for your life. But that's how they've been fighting on that basis for decades, and we're still talking about, well, who are you going to vote for? And they're fighting a war, and we think it's an election campaign. We don't realize that in our world, these people control both parties, but they have to put on a good show. You've got to have a big fight, otherwise people aren't going to believe it's true. So the parties will fight against each other, they'll argue with each other, but they'll both do the same thing when they're in office. Maybe you hadn't noticed that. Whether they're for war or against war, more taxes, less, doesn't make any difference, much difference. They're all always moving in the same direction. They never go backwards the other way. They're always, it's a question of who's going to go the furthest and the quickest in the direction of collectivism and tyranny. So to answer your question, what can be done? We have to start becoming active in the battlefield, which is this out in the real world where the people are, and recapture control of these power centers from the inside, exactly as they took them from us. It can be done, and we're already doing it actually, or started the motion. And that's why we have something called Red Pill University and its sister organization called Red Pill Expo. Red Pill Expo is an event that we have a couple of times a year where we bring together speakers, qualified speakers on various themes similar to what we've been talking about here. But this is people who have come from inside their own professions, who have learned the hard way, like my good friend Dr. Richardson learned about what happened to the medical profession after he was already a doctor and into it. And these are people from all the professions, and some of them from government, some of them from education, some of them from health. Anyway, all people, some just like me, just writers, just researching ideas and trying to discover things. And the idea not only is to explain what's really going on, to see how the world really works, although that's part of it, but the idea is to bring people together of like mind so we can form coalitions and push back against this juggernaut that I've been describing on the other side. This group of collectivists work hard together. They're fighting a war, and we're still sending emails to each other. Say, listen to this. Did you hear a horrible thing that happened? That's the idea, just to tell somebody about how bad things are. We think that's our limitation of our power. We haven't even begun to explore what we can do once we decide to get out of our homes and out into the real world where the public is and start to become influential in these power centers of society. So I'm going to close all this, Vera, because I know once I get going, I could just go on forever and ever. I know I'm boring people to death, no doubt. So let me conclude to say that I'm an old guy, but I've got enough left in me. I'd like to see the completion of building this movement I've just been talking about. We're underway now. We're on the way. We have our Red Pill University, our Red Pill Expo is going. And all we need now is to bring people together so they can discover they're not alone. I believe, maybe this is a good theme to close on. How hopeless is this, or how optimistic could we be? All right. As I see it, history has always been written by very few people, percentage-wise, in the whole population. I think it goes like this. There's about 1% of the population who you might consider to be the thought leaders, the visionaries, whatever you want to call them, the Thomas Jeffersons, the Patrick Henrys, the people that we know in our own American experience created the American Republic. A few people who had this vision, and they started the fires in the minds of other men. And then that fire jumped to 3% of the population, who would be perhaps what we call today the influencers. These are the leaders in their community. These were the people who not only were in perhaps parliamentary organizations, but they were maybe church goers, church leaders. Maybe they were the shoe shop owner. Maybe they were the baker. Maybe they were just educators who were teachers. But 3% were the influencers, the people that really took this idea from the 1% and gave it life. Now the 3% caught fire with the idea, and then they influenced 15% of the doers. These are the people who are busy with their own lives, too busy to spend all the time, thinking and talking and debating and planning how we're going to win a war or something like that. All they can do is say, yes, count me in. When you need me, I'll be there. And I understand. And we are all comrades together in our mutual cause. And then that 15% wins every time. Now, to round this out, usually in a conflict of the kind we're discussing, there's another 15% on the other side pushing backwards. It's usually conflict that brings this all into question. And the 70% in the middle has no clue as to what the heck is even going on. And as far as they're concerned, they'll never make much difference. Their attitude is, well, we're going to wait and see who wins, and that's the side we're going to be on. It always works that way. So when you think about that and you go back and look at some of the episodes in history that verify that analysis, it can take great encouragement, because 15% is not that hard. In fact, I think we have already reached more than 15% of the population. But they think they're all alone. All they know is they look at their television set, and that to them that's the world, and that looks like it's gone, But if they could know that we were in the majority by far, they would take heart. And then the next step, you can't, just because you're in the majority doesn't mean you win. You better do something with your majority. We have to become active, and that's where we have to field our own candidates for office. We can't just wait till the election rolls around and say, well, who's running for office, to decide who you're going to vote for. Boy, by that time it's all over, because most of the candidates are already handpicked and financed and everything, and you come in too late in the game to make any difference. No, this is something where we have to pick our own candidates, and we'll be looking for people who don't want to run for office. That'll be quite different. In fact, when somebody wants to run for office, you better be slow and careful. There's something fishy going on, because the kind of people we're interested in aren't interested in using office for their own personal gain. They're really interested in dedicating a portion of their lives to serve their fellow man and have freedom and liberty and all of the good things in life, instead of living in slavery. So we can build that, and we're doing it through what we call campuses. Campuses are being formed right now in every county in the United States. And those campuses sounds like it's educational. Well, it is educational, but it's more than that. It's more like activism. It's more like getting those candidates running for office. It's more like showing up at town hall meetings and expressing your opinion. It's more like calling in on the radio every day and making sure that the point of view of individualism is expressed on those call-in shows. It's more like writing letters to the editor and things like that, and forming groups and having parties and things like that, being visible. Let people know that we're here and we're in the majority. So with that, I'll just close off. I think I've talked too much, but that's pretty much what's on my mind, and it's not as glum as you might think, because if you have a plan, and we do, then, well, let's go out and do it.
How can people find more about you and your movement?
Oh, well, that's easy. I think the best place to start for people who want to make a difference in the world, and those are the ones we're interested in, that 15%, especially the 3%. Yeah, the good place to start would be redpillexpo.org. Now that's our event. We have an event twice a year, and the next one is coming up in November. By the time this gets on the air, it'll be November already. So the date is November 16 and 17. That's where you find people of like mind, and you make friends, and you sit down and decide, well, how are we going to work together? And how are we going to make this happen? So that's where I would start, redpillexpo.org. And then for the movement that builds the campuses and has the year-round activity, that would be redpilluniversity.org. So that's the place to start. And if you want to read some books and see some videos that we have for sale, this is not about money for us, but we do have a lot of books and videos for sale. And if you want to see where we get these outlandish ideas, why, that would be a good place to begin. And that's realityzone.com. I wrote something that I've been giving away, and it's turned out to be very popular, I'm glad to say. I've been writing a book. I'm embarrassed to say this. My next book was started the day after 9/11. So obviously I'm getting worried about finishing this book. I've got about 70% of it done, but it occurred to me that maybe I won't be around long enough to finish the book. And there's one important part in that book I want to get out now without waiting for the book. And that is the ideology that motivates this movement. The ideology, what do we believe in? It's easy to know what we're against. We don't like slavery. We don't like tyranny. We don't like dishonesty in government. We don't like plunder. It's easy to know what we don't like because it hurts. But what do we want? What do we replace it with? That's one of the greatest problems of history, is that downtrodden people have risen up when it was intolerable. They couldn't take it anymore. They've risen up against their slave masters, and at great cost and treasure and blood, they may have been able to overthrow the tyranny that has crushed them, only to replace it by another one just as bad, or maybe even worse. It's because they didn't know what they wanted. They didn't know what it takes to have freedom in a social system. It's never been taught in school. In fact, it's never been taught anywhere, as far as I'm aware. I've read most, if not all, of the old books that I can get my hands on, going back hundreds of years on the issues of liberty and freedom, and there's some excellent material, and not some, I mean, there's oceans of excellent material, but no one has ever come up with a creed of what we believe in as opposed to what we don't want. Now, our opponents have, interestingly enough. I mean, let's start with Karl Marx, wrote the Communist Manifesto, or he's said to have written it. He did much of the grunt work on it. Workers of the world, arise, throw off your chains, and also against war and racism and so forth. And he outlined all of the principles of collectivism in his book, that and Das Kapital. Adolf Hitler wrote Mein Kampf. And to my amazement, I discovered that, by the way, Adolf Hitler and Karl Marx believe exactly the same thing. Exactly the same thing. Their principles were exactly the same thing. And those principles are of collectivism. And it turns out that fascism, Nazism, communism, socialism, all these isms are really variants of the same underlying ideology called collectivism. And once we understand that, then it's easy to see why no one has ever written a book about it, because no one has identified collectivism as the issue behind all issues. Well, it took me a long time to come to that realization myself, but it finally did. And so why I'm telling you this is that I decided to take all the material that I had written for the upcoming book on this topic of the battle between collectivism and individualism is in this booklet that I put together about 9 or 10 months ago. It's called The Chasm, and it's collectivism versus individualism. And it's really the issue behind all issues. And the reason this is important is because so far in history, no one has focused on this dichotomy, this division, this chasm between individualism and collectivism as the issue upon which all other political issues depend. And once you get that vision and that reality in your mind, it suddenly becomes so clear that what appears to be a very complex issue of what do you believe in turns out to be amazingly simple. There are about 7 principles that I found that were in Karl Marx's writings and Adolf Hitler's writings that were identical exactly, almost word for word, actually. And I made note of those things. And I wrote them down as these are the principles of our enemy, collectivism. And then I realized that in the old books, there was another word that was usually used in opposition to collectivism, and that was individualism. Well, those words are kind of strange to the average person today, and I didn't realize that they were commonly used and well understood 100 years ago. The old books had them all, collectivism, individualism, everybody talked about it. Today, nobody knows. What is that? And then I discovered, well, it seemed like there was a systematic removal of these words from common everyday use, starting during World War I, and certainly by the end of World War II, it was accomplished. And in my view, I think it's because the idea of collectivism had already infected the minds of American leaders by this time. It wasn't just Marx anymore. It wasn't just Adolf Hitler anymore. It was American leaders with American names believing the same thing. And they didn't really like it when, if you had a word like collectivism that could describe both, the views of American leaders and their enemies as the same. So that was removed from the vocabulary. I would like to put it back in because it answers a lot of questions. So anyway, what I'm saying is that I put them all together, and this is the pamphlet, and I urge anybody that wants to explore this idea to get it for free. It's absolutely free. Just go to our website. I'll give you the URL, and just download it. It's for free. You can print it out like I did, bind it, give it to your friends to read, or just read it online, and then you'll understand what it is that can unite this movement and put fuel into it. The reason everybody is so, one of the reasons everybody is so they're divided from each other, and they're, oh, let's do this, no, let's do that, no, this is more important, and well, this is an America First movement. No, it's international. No, it's got to be America first. Well, it's got to be, religion has to be in there, doesn't it? No, there shouldn't be any religion because everybody's got a different religion. Yeah, but we got to have unity. How can you do that if you're arguing over religion? So forth. All these things. Once you get this understanding that this issue is between collectivism and individualism, and everybody in the universe can agree on one side or the other with no confusion as to where you stand and why, we can put clarity into this battle for the first time. And this is what I'm hoping that you will help me to do. So if you want to explore that, go online and just type in chasm, CHASM, .realityzone, all one word, .com. So that's chasm.realityzone.com, and download this, and then come join us. Come join us at Red Pill University and Red Pill Expo, and we can take back our liberties and our freedom.
Thank you so much, Mr. Griffin. It was such an honor to speak with you today. Thank you once again for all of your fantastic work, all of the research that you've done and presented to the world. And my last question, a lot of people are asking it. You look great. And I'm sure if you didn't mention your age at the beginning of the interview, many people would not have guessed it. What's your secret?
Well, I'm flattered that that question comes up as a secret. I don't have any secrets. There are no secrets. There are things that I do that are a little bit unusual, but there's no secret to it because most people know about these things. They just choose not to do it. Like I was until I discovered that cancer was something that didn't have to happen if I was smart enough to just follow nature.
If you'd like to support our work, join our channel as a member and be the first to watch all new videos as soon as they come out.
So, okay, what do I do that most people would call a secret? I try as best I can to avoid toxic things. I used to, when I was a young guy, I did what most young guys do. I drank a lot of alcohol whenever there was a party going. Count me in, you know. I don't do that anymore. Many years ago, I read some article about the stuff they put in shampoos that was toxic. I thought, what? Well, I'm here, and it was probably at least, I'm going to say at least 50 years ago that I stopped using shampoo and soap. Now that doesn't mean I don't take a bath. It's just that I learned to scrub my body rather than use soap because Even those nice, innocent sounding bars of soap like Dove or something like that sound so pure, white, have toxic things in them. And I gave up underarm deodorants because they're loaded with aluminum. And I gave up drinking anything out of a can made of aluminum. I gave up brushing my teeth with anything that had fluorine in it and things like that. And it's just giving up all these things that it wasn't hard to do that are toxic. I think that might have had something to do with it. By this time it was too late. I already had a lot of silver in my teeth, and I had that removed because silver, I shouldn't, mercury, I shouldn't say silver, it's mercury, actually. It was the toxic part, but I think they mixed it with silver sometimes. Anyway, I got that removed. So that was the biggest thing probably. And then of course I try and eat healthy things. My wife helps me a great deal in that because left to my own resources, I probably would eat a lot more junk food than I would normally. Let's see, what else? That's about it. I try and exercise a little bit every day. I think that keeping the lymph system operating is important. Helps you remove toxins. You can't be healthy unless you're getting rid of toxins. That's part of the process. And then I have a couple of supplements that I take that are a little bit unusual. I take a telomerase activator, which is called Recharge. Many of your listeners may know what a telomere is, but it's associated with longevity. All of our cells have the DNA part of our cells have caps at the end of them that are often described as like shoelace caps. And they keep the DNA components in the cell, supposedly. I don't know if they do or not, but that's the literature. And then every time these cells die through a process called apoptosis, which is natural death of a cell that replaces an old cell with a new cell, it's not a bad thing at all. It's a good thing because you get rid of the old and replace it with the new. But every time you go through that replacement, this little telomere cap loses a little piece of it. And you go through life, first thing you know, you're out of caps. And that cell now is exposed at the end, and your DNA starts to malfunction. And that's when you start showing up with really severe aging symptoms. Well, there have been some experiments where they found some substances, and one in particular, oh my golly, I'll think of it in a minute. Anyway, that stimulates the body's production of telomerase, which is an enzyme that causes normal cells to regrow these telomeres. And I'm still trying to think of the name of the substance. It's a weird chemical name. I'll think of it in a minute, perhaps. Anyway, it's not important what the name is. It's something that's found in nature. It's found in a plant, but it's astragalus. The plant is astragalus, and the substance itself is cycloestrogenol. There it is. It finally came up. Cycloestrogenol is the concentrated substance that comes out of the astragalus plant. And it takes, I don't know, many bushels of astragalus to get one little half ounce of cycloestrogenol. But apparently this cycloestrogenol is the telomere activator that causes the caps on your cells to rejuvenate. And there's some pretty hard evidence on that. So I've been taking that for about, 15 years or so. Take it every day. I don't know if it's doing any good or not. I just don't want to stop and find out.
I think the evidence is there.
I have no idea. How can you tell? The studies show that the telomeres are lengthened. That's true. That part has been verified. But now the big question is, after they're lengthened, does that cause longevity to increase or not? Well, there's no way that I know of to prove it. So I do take that, and I take another substance called SOUL, S-O-U-L. It's all plant, it's all seed-based nutrition. It's ground up seeds, mostly from different types of grapes. and extremely nutritious. And I like the idea because, well, you know, seeds are the source of all life. Even animal life eat plants in order to survive, and even carnivores eat other animals that eat plants. It all starts with plants, and that all starts with seeds. And so it occurred to me that maybe there's something to this. And the reason I got into that is that this was about 18 years ago, I guess it was. I came down with a pretty bad case of shingles, and it was really bad. Normally, shingles would go away in 3 or 4 weeks, and mine didn't go away. I had a couple of months, and it was getting worse. And I discovered at that point, I got serious about reading up on it, and discovered that if it doesn't go away in a reasonable period of time and starts getting worse, that it could be fatal, that the prognosis was very bad in that case. And that's where I was. I thought, well, I better get serious about this. So I tried everything, hyperbaric chamber, IV dosages of all these good vitamin C and other things, and it didn't work at all. And then I got a call. I got a call from this voice on the phone. Hello, Ed? I said, yes, who's speaking? Oh, this is Dr. Weeks. You don't know me, he said, but I understand you have shingles. I said, well, Dr. Weeks, that's true, but how the heck did you know I have shingles? I don't even know you. Was this on CNN or something? And he said, no, he said, you had to cancel the speech you were going to make, and they called me to replace you. That's how I learned about your shingles. He said, I would like to send you something that I highly recommend. And I'm not interested by this time in doctors telling me that I need to take another med. I said, well, what kind of med is that? He said, no meds. This comes from nature. I said, oh, well, now I'm listening. So he sent me this thing called Soul, a little package of Soul. It's like jelly. It's kind of flavorful, actually. And he said, it's all seeds, just a lot of high-powered seeds. He said, drink a little bit of it, about a half an ounce, and rub the rest of it from the package on your sores and see what happens. I said, okay, well, thank you very much, Doc. That's great. Well, this package arrived, and naturally, I drank a little bit of it. Well, it tasted pretty good. And I rubbed it on my sores and everything. Well, the first day went by, nothing happened. No, well, didn't expect it to. The second day went by, no, nothing happened. Third day, whoa, wait a minute. I'm not itching so much. Fourth day, all of a sudden, I could see that the scabs were beginning to dry up. The fifth day was even better. Anyway, to make a long story short, after about, I think it was 3 weeks, that shingles was gone. And so I've been a fan ever since. I figured if they can do that to shingles, they can do that for a lot of toxicity that you're going to have in your body, which is what shingles is all about. And so I have that, I take that, and I think I've reached the end of my list of things that you asked about. And by the way, I sell these things now. I figured if they were good enough for me, people asked me the same question you did, and I would tell them pretty much the same thing I just did. And they'd say, well, where can I get this stuff? And I didn't know. So I thought, well, wait a minute, dummy. You sell books and things. Why don't you sell some nutritional products and see what happens? So I did, and that's where it is. I don't talk much about it because I don't want to be a salesman for that, but people who inquire will find out that's what I take. And you'll find it on realityzone.com.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure and honor to speak with you. Thanks again, and hope we'll talk again in the future.
Well, I hope so too. I hope I haven't bored you and your customers and your listeners all to death, but you keep on your good work. I like your questions, by the way, and
Thank
I could
you.
tell by those questions you're a student. So, God bless.
Yes. Yes. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.